This is the Healthcare Marketplace Specialization, Healthcare Marketplace Overview. I'm Steve Parenti, and this is Module 5.3.4, Lula Technology Return Investment. Again, we're continuing on looking at the NeoCore technology focused on mitral valve repair. Growth trends for heart procedures are actually pretty strong indications that this technology is going to be pretty successful. We just look over a period of time and then extrapolate it out even further, looking at 2% annual growth rates for heart valve procedures in the United States today. If we think about life cycle analysis for a technology like this, and on our right side we have market share indicator and time going out to 2024, what we would think about for this technology is about a 12-year life cycle component where the technology is now ramping up and growing in its market share. The Opus is going to reach full maturity probably around 2023. Max market share at that point would be about 32%, and then would start declining after that. Now, if we look at the intellectual property or IP landscape, it's crowded, but there's not necessarily things that can't be surmounted here. We have 210 issued patents referring to mitral valve repair, most focus on annuloplasty and valvuloplasty, which is not what we're talking about here. The eValve and Edwards focus on valve clipping or suturing. 62 have issued patents referencing to chordae tendineae, which is what this technology is about. There's valve staples, valve clips, there's fusion, and prosthetic valves. There is lots of activity in this space. Prosthetic chordae tendon replacement appears not to infringe and appears patentable at first glance. So that's kind of key, is that this is a prosthetic chordae replacement, and gives some, if you will, clearance for folks to operate, at least on the patent front. So, IP analysis, NeoCore licensed its intellectual property or patent in 2005, awaiting issuance. NeoCore filed 4 additional continuation patents in 2007. NeoCore technology and design appears defensible through patent protection. When we look about the effectiveness of the technology, again, back to some of our cost effectiveness discussions before, there's a substantial clinical testing suggests it's going to work fine. There's standard mechanical bench tests showing that it works fairly well. There's qualitative assessments of ease of physician use, which is still a work in progress, and then the patient feedback regarding experience. We're still in animal trials to a certain extent, so we don't have all that in. And then the failure analysis. This has to be performed on the materials intended to be used to make sure things are actually going to stay where they need to be placed. Manufacturing analysis suggests that the outsourcing strategy developed makes most sense. Developmental costs for getting design refinement and scale up is about $400,000. Unit cost is anticipated to be about $1,200. There is a fiber optic sensor that's going to see whether or not you get that clamp or not. That's a major cost driver. Average total gross margin will be about 80%, with cost reductions leading with volume in coming up in year 6. For regulatory, looking at FDA, this is a Class 3 medical device. Again, back to when we talked about this in earlier modules, we're sticking it in a person's body, and it's going to stay there for a while. And it's actually going to govern their heart function. It's a major issue. So PMA is going to be required. Estimated time to market about 3 years. Cost is going to be about $8 million, $6.6 million in the U.S., focused on their clinical trials, and $1.4 million in the EU. So for risks, the concerns you're going to run into, this is more strategic, is that rather than clinical to the patient, it's going to take longer than expected potentially to get this thing through. You can have low enrollment or more patients required if we can't get out of animal studies quickly enough. Device will fail to meet clinical trial endpoints. There's a safety and efficacy requirement of FDA if that doesn't go well. And PMA review process could be longer than expected, sometimes maybe 3 years. FDA may decide not to approve at the end, and then in the long run, CMS or Medicare may not decide not to pay for it. This concludes our analysis on the NeoCore technology with respect to IP and regulatory affairs.